Welcome, everybody. Today is Anti-Corruption Day 2025, and we would like to celebrate this day discussing the progress results of our project BridgeGap. I'm Luca Remotti. I'm a Senior Research Associate to the Lisbon Council, and I welcome you all to this webinar. Just for you to know, we would like to record it. If you really mind being broadcast after this webinar, you just write me in the chat and tell me, and we will not broadcast any video from your side. Okay, without further ado, I would like to hand over, we would like to provide you with a general overview on the BridgeGap project, which works on the extensive and deep topic of corruption and policy, corruption and political science from many different points of view. And we have here Professor Alina Mungiu-Pippidi, who is the principal investigator and also the originator of this project, and she will introduce us all to where BridgeGap stands and where it will be going. So please, Professor Mungiu-Pippidi, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Hello, BridgeGap team, and hello, outside guests, and welcome to this new edition of the BridgeGap podcast, Anti-Corruption in Progress. Amazing enough, we have reached by now quite the 8th edition, I think, and we are preparing for more in the next years and probably even after the end of this project. Today, we have the pleasure to highlight the work of a specific group within BridgeGap, the group working on public integrity management, the WIP4 group led by Professor Adina Dudau from the University of Glasgow and her colleagues. But before that, just a few words, as I actually introduced every time these seminars, we try to place our work in a broader context of corruption and anti-corruption. And this was an interesting week in Europe, the past week in Europe, because finally, apparently, an agreement was struck over the European Directive Against Corruption, which was finally agreed in the European Council. And maybe you watched us, if you recall, on October 30, when we actually had an anti-corruption in progress with professors of comparative law dedicated exactly to this, the Europeanization of anti-corruption. And now it happened. We are going to have further conversations, hopefully in this format, on to what extent this directive really helps anti-corruption, is what people expected, where is the lowest common denominator, where an agreement was struck, and the rest. But right now, I would like, without further ado, and I will return at the end with more comments, to pass the floor to Professor Dudau.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Thank you so much.
Yes.
I take the nods to mean yes. Thank you, Alina, for the introduction. I too was delighted to see the Anti-Corruption Directive making some progress, and as anticipated, just in time for the International Anti-Corruption Day, which is today. So this is the pretext under which we brought you here. And the second pretext is the deliverable of Work Package 4, Integrity Management Systems. We delivered this about a month ago, and we are delighted to launch it formally today. So Work Package 4 is one of 11 work packages within BridgeGap, and BridgeGap is a collection of micro-level and macro-level concerns with corruption and anti-corruption. And what we do in Work Package 4 is meet that meso level of organizations in all areas, public, private, hybrid, ownership areas, but organizational. And that makes us unique within the BridgeGap context. And yeah, we'll tell you more about the deliverable. But beforehand, I wanted to invite Bernhard Reinsberg, who is one of our colleagues and who did a lot of really interesting research at this meso level of anti-corruption efforts. In particular, research of his basically argues that ethics doesn't cost the earth. So in more ways than one. So I invited Bernhard to introduce our work within the wider context of his work in this area. So Bernhard, I will be changing your slides, so don't be afraid to say change slide, and then we'll go back to work package 4.
Great, fantastic. Colleagues, friends, thank you so much for making the time coming along today. Thank you for the introduction, Adina. Yeah, I think I want to set the tone a little bit with, some horizon scanning in some sense of some work we have done recently here that looks at a slightly different issue, obviously, namely the regulation of supply chains and, how this affects firms' performance. So, we can easily think about how regulation in the domain of anti-corruption and good governance, would probably fall along similar lines. So, probably still related to what we're all discussing today. So, just a brief highlight of, what we found here. So, next slide. Let me tell you a little bit about more what this research was about. So, we asked the question of whether regulation necessarily undermines firms' profits. And the background for this is, of course, as you all know, that there is increasing pressure for holding firms accountable for governance failures, particularly in the domain of human rights, but also governance, in particular, environmental damages. And that includes not only firms themselves, but also, all the contractors in their supply chains in a globalized world, obviously. And the key debate is whether, we should put our money on voluntary standards, allowing firms essentially to pick and choose which scheme they would like to subscribe themselves to, like the UN Global Compact, for instance, or whether there should really be a hard law regulation, right? So there's a couple of good examples in recent years, not only the EU C3SD, but also other states have taken on this much earlier, like the French loi de vigilance, or supply chain law, if you want, from 2017. And that's indeed the case that we look at for investigating the effects of such regulation on firms' outcomes. So to investigate that, we collected a data set of 11,500 firms based in France or having French subsidiaries from Orbis, which is a widely used data set in business. It's a panel that tracks these firms over like a 15-year period, 2008 to 2022. And the key outcome that we looked at was the likelihood of these firms making profit. So, often the dimension that, is most discussed in public discourse around, whether or not we should regulate firms more tightly. And our main treatment here was whether the firm had at least 5,000 employees or was part of a conglomerate that had 10,000 employees globally, which is exactly the thresholds that this supply chain law defines in the French context. And we were also interested in tracking in which ways, through which mechanisms this law might affect firms' profitability, namely looking at the total revenue, right? But also warehouse turnover, so how efficient are firms handling their supply chains, but also staff costs per employee. And our main strategy to look at this, basically in statistical terms speaking, is to compare firms that are relatively similar, so within the same sector, even within the same sector year, but also and within firms over time, right, before and after. So that's sort of a method known as high-dimensional fixed effects regression. And I'm happy to talk about over Q&A if there are any questions about it. But, essentially comparing those firms to themselves and to others who are very close in terms of background characteristics, but that did not fall under the regulation. So we have a baseline, a yardstick for comparison. And the key result I want you to walk away with from this presentation is that we found no discernible effects of the law on the likelihood of profits by these firms. So all the sort of fears seem to be overblown that industry associations have often put forward against such laws. What we did find, however, was a transitory increase in staff cost before the implementation. So 2 to 3 years before the law was implemented, you see that firms obviously have made investments into, the personnel that is, expert on issues like due diligence and compliance and so on, right? So a transitory change, but that just shows how important it is, I believe, to scale up these efforts also to the European level in order to level the playing field, right? And overall, we were also surprised to see that there's no across the board significant effects of regulation. So hopefully that, sets the tone a little bit for our collective efforts in designing regulation against corruption that, goes beyond voluntary schemes and firms' sort of self-proclaimed initiatives moving forward. So thank you so much for your attention. And over
Thank
to you,
you
Adina.
so much, Bernhard. That piece of research really caught my attention because it reassured me that if we ask businesses to do more in this area, we may not need to face resistance. I see, Luca, you raised your hand there.
Sorry. Quickly, one remark. Since this is a very interesting topic, any questions will be taken at the end. And please, all of you or us, because I also have some questions, who want to ask questions, please note them, put them in the chat, or wait for the last QA session just to ask them directly. Thank you.
Great. So if you want to know more, the paper is published in Review of International Political Economy. So yes, without further ado, let's find out what we found out in this deliverable on integrity management systems for anti-corruption. Now, what we try to do here is, as I said at the start, is focus on that meso level. So really bridge the gap between, or the divide between macro level regulations or regulatory ambitions and micro level behavioral outcomes. Because what was signaled in several studies, including by Professor Mungiu-Pippidi, was that despite regulatory efforts, the level of corruption has not changed, with very, very few exceptions in very few countries, but overall they didn't seem to change. So are we missing something? Are we not regulating the right things or the right way? So our hunch here in Work Package 4 is that perhaps we're not regulating organizations as much as we are imposing policies and regulations on states, so countries. So what we wanted to do here is examine how organizations in particular sectors, because obviously we had to focus on some to find out anything at all, how those organizations design and use what we call the integrity management systems. Now, we say high-risk sectors, and how did we decide those are high-risk sectors? The European Commission helped us decide. They issued a report on 6 high-risk sectors for corruption. Now, we took that and discarded one of them. One of them is public procurement, so that's not an organizational sector as such. So therefore, we put that to a side. We arrived at 5, and I'll let you know in a minute how we got to those particular 5. I'll tell you now, actually. Right. So part of my research is on public services, and in that area, I like the spectrum of publicness on which organizations and sectors of activity, of economic activity, can place themselves on. So the spectrum is between public value and private value dominance. So in the public value dominance side of the spectrum, you have organizations or areas of economic activity that are more in the use of society than in the use of individuals, where access is so access to services supplied in those areas, access is obtained on the level of citizenship and needs and rights rather than wants, so that consumerist, individual-driven access to services, as in the case of, for example, banking, right, where individual wants are prioritized to societal needs. And yes, there is some regulation in banking as well. There is some level of publicness in all of them, and there is also some level of privateness in all of them. In defense, for example, one cannot opt out of defense if a country decides that defense is needed. It's a societal level decision, and it's often funded through taxation, etc. But that doesn't mean that there aren't private organizations delivering in that area. So we took the 5 remaining high-risk sectors that the European Commission identified, and those are defense, critical infrastructure, healthcare, sports, and banking, and we placed them on this continuum. And we were able to cover the entire continuum with defense on one side of the spectrum and banking on the other side. Infrastructure, healthcare, sports, as you go towards the right side of the continuum, the publicness decreases, and with it, the likelihood that public sector organizations are involved in those sectors. So indeed, we looked at Leonardo, which is a private sector organization with significant public sector capital in Italy for defense. Then for infrastructure, we looked at the Post Office. That's a UK organization, entirely public sector. For healthcare, we looked at Novartis Greece, Novartis Hellas, which is a private sector organization, a pharmaceutical organization. But the sector at which we observed corruption, anti-corruption measures is healthcare more generally. So not just Novartis, but Novartis plays a very important role there. Then in sports, we looked at a sort of inter-organizational case called Operation Zero or Operation Clean Hands in Belgium. And finally, in banking, we looked at Nordea, Finland. Now, I did mention some countries because countries and ensuring a mix of country was important to us. Hang on. The reason why it was important to us is that we wanted to have a mix of cleaner and more vulnerable systems, cleaner and more vulnerable according to the Corruption Perception Index, but also cleaner and more vulnerable according to Europam. Again, there is research to suggest that these two are sort of inversely correlated. The cleaner a country looks on CPI index, the fewer or weaker accountability systems it has on Europam, and the other way around. So we wanted a mix of these countries. However, even though we say that Leonardo is Italian and so on, what we also noticed is that most of these cases were cases of transnational corruption. So just because the case or the organization that we focused on and at which website we looked at and tried to find all documents on the web about that company, just because that company was based in Finland doesn't mean that the corruption took place in Finland. In fact, the picture is quite varied there. But one commonality is that it's transnational corruption. So, for example, Leonardo Leonardo was found to engage in corrupt acts in India, in Indonesia, in South Korea, Panama, and so on. Post office, well, Fujitsu was found to engage in integrity failures in the UK. So Fujitsu being a Japanese company within, within the UK. Nordea was found in Denmark, and so on and so forth. So all of them are involved in some sort of transnational corruption, sometimes within the EU. In Novartis and Operation Zero case was within the EU, and Nordea as well, but sometimes outside the EU. So in the case of the post office, Fujitsu is a Japanese company. In the case of Leonardo, most of those acts were committed abroad, or the ones that were found were committed abroad. So a really interesting mix. And this is why it was important to us to focus on the organization and not on the countries, but at the same time, not choose organizations that were only connected to a particular part of the world. Again, we know from the literature that the studies of corruption tend to focus in particular parts of the world, and we didn't want to do that. We wanted to be a bit more nuanced in that. So we are academics, so while we looked at these cases of corruption, we tried to understand what's happening. We also tried to not call it corruption in the headline, but rather integrity. So to look at the opposite side of corruption, which is integrity. And we found with not much surprise, to be honest, that there is a whole definitional terrain of integrity, and there isn't too much consensus on what integrity is. It varies from compliance to more inclusive ethics, like understandings of integrity. But it basically means doing the right things in the right way. But in an organizational setting or in an organizational sense, integrity management refers to deliberate management measures designed to get to ensure that employees and therefore organizations do the right thing, including but not limited to complying with legal norms. So it was very important for us that we didn't just look at compliance. Now, there is some literature on that. Obviously, it would be very surprising if there wasn't. There are integrity management frameworks. There is an ethics program by Captain, integrity management framework by, I will mispronounce their name, unfortunately, Meschalk and Bertok. But we thought those looked too much like add-ons to what organizations were already doing. And we wanted to find a way to analyze what organizations did using things that they were already doing. So we looked at the accounting and management control literature for the levers of control. The levers of control are four, essentially. Belief systems, sort of values, ethics, codes, mission of an organization, ways in which organization signals to their employees and to the world what they stand for, and what they stand for on ethics as well. Then boundary systems, which are formal rules, codes. Think of it as an operationalization of their belief system. So what you are not allowed to do in that organization. Diagnostic systems, those are the ones that most of us are familiar with from our own work as well. So key performance indicators, the things that are actually measured at the end of the year or at the end of the term and so on. The fourth lever of control is interactive systems, so ways for organizations to collect intel, both from their employees, but also from outside the organization. So there are sort of forums, dialogues, use of intermediaries, feedback loops, essentially. And the core proposition within this management control theory is that it's not just the existence of these 4 levers that make a difference to organizations, but their balance and interplay is what makes a difference. So we turned that into an integrity management system. We put that in the middle, and the 4 levers of control around that one aim. So because going through 5 sectors would take the better half, but the better part of the day, I thought we could continue going in depth into only one case, and that's the UK Post Office. So Denisse, over to you, and I could change the slides if you like.
Yeah, if you could help me, it will be
Fabulous.
I think it would be better. Well,
No
thank
problem.
you. Thank you everyone for joining us in this International Day of Anti-Corruption. We're going to dig deeper on one of the case studies in our report. And this is the case of the UK Post Office Horizon IT scandal. Probably most of the people don't know what is it, because it's a case that it's been covered in media extensively, mostly in the UK. But what we found interesting about this case is a challenge our common wisdoms on when these integrity breaches occur and what are even the language that is used in media to refer to it. I recall a conversation with Adina telling them that such a case in a place like Latin America, where I come from, will be a huge corruption scandal. It will be everywhere. Whereas in the UK, it's just, we call it like an affair and scandal. It's not considered a corruption case, which is also very telling of how we understand, how we conceptualize, and eventually how we measure and how we fight this. So what happened? The post office launched a program called the Horizon IT system in a quest for make operations more transparent and easier. So basically try to improve accountability with all the bank tellers across the UK. If you've been to the UK, you've probably seen a post office and a little branch or a bank of the post office, either in the post office or in other businesses. These people are called postmasters or postmistresses, and they are franchisees, so they are not directly employees of the post office, which is very important to understand what everything goes wrong. What happened is that this system was flawed. The post office knew, and Fujitsu too, that it was flawed since it was being implemented by the Department of Social Security in the UK. And basically what ended up happening is a lot of false reporting shortfalls that been accredited to these postmasters and postmistresses across the UK. This has led to financial ruin, distress, even suicide, so more than 1,000 people across the UK for the past 2 decades. So this case has been ongoing for a long time before it finally reaches common public opinion. And basically it was due to a public inquiry that found these systemic failures in public procurement, whistleblowing protections, and over-reliance in technology, which I think it's very important to have in mind now in this age of generative AI and large language models, and the abuse of authority by the post office. The next slide, please. So why the post office? It's an interesting case to analyze the breach or how it works or when they stop working on integrity management system. It's a very complex institution that used to be fully government owned, and now it's open to the public, and it kind of relates and have a mandate of the UK department to oversee what's going on, but up to a point to leave them be. It creates a social political service mandate, but they also respond to commercial pressure. So this is very important, because in order to keep ensuring that the system was working, and in fact it was a problem of an individual bank teller and not the system, basically that's why created this lock-in error when they found that it was more less let's say more market profitable, less reputational cost worthy to maintain this idea instead of conducting a series of internal audits or to listen to a couple of private examinators that found that the system was flawed. So the relationship from Fujitsu IT, no, please, can we go back? The relationship with Fujitsu, actually, it's ongoing, despite extensive coverage and evidence, and actually the fact that Fujitsu and some members of the post office board member declared that they knew it was faulty. It's still ongoing. It still has contracts with the UK. And every couple of weeks, we have new piece of news regarding this case. Basically, what happened is that postmasters and postmistresses were not covered under the current whistleblowing directive in the UK, which is also another way of understanding how well or not these directives protect people, individuals that are supposed to relate or to report this wrongdoing. Or the next one. A public inquiry had the mandate to investigate, and the findings of this public inquiry are published, and probably they're going to be used and going to be studied in across disciplines: law, political science, public management, I think even business schools, due to the extensive errors, locking errors, like of Monday, like of internal audit, and also how the post office was conducted, the private prosecutorial powers that arises from a long history of how the post office started in the UK and how what is, well, not so more, but used to be one of the most well-regarded brands in the UK. The next one, please. So what we see is the integrity breach. Basically, what we see is an abuse of power, this lack of audits that created this imbalance in the integrity management between the boundary, interactive, diagnostic, and belief integrity management systems. What we see if the contracts and the agreements and the prior prosecutorial powers, the post office has this special prosecutorial power to conduct investigations outside the police. So what it creates is a fast track of investigations, but also they lack the know-how of a police agent, and also they can act faster and without checks and balance, unlike other cases. So they create this kind of fast track of people being held accountable for basically charges that they didn't commit. And they were used punishingly against the postmasters, and there was a strategy to charge them with higher crimes so they can declare themselves guilty of lesser ones. So it was also used in a very unethical way. Then diagnostic systems that were failing with this uncritical reliance of Horizon data of a single source of truth. There was no interest in digging deeper of what's going on, what was the problem, of whether the system can be indeed flawed, which it was the case. There were reports of up to 15 different bugs across the UK, across these 2 decades. Then the interactive system, it's the eternal challenge, the escalation, and the meaningful whistleblower challenges that were suppressed or ignored across these 2 decades. Another point that's also interesting and very tragic is that the National Post Office, postmaster workers of the post office, they receive funding from the post office, which prevent them from arising any issue or controversy. So that here we see another way that free speech or the right to dissent was suppressed. And finally, belief systems, the comparative values. The post office used to say, here we are, anywhere you need it for the people. And clearly they failed everyone, not only the bank tellers and the supermasters, but the whole UK public, because they were not committed to serving the community as they supposed to be. And it was largely performative, and they failed to protect basically these one-on-one people that are in charge of managing small operations. Let's remember those that are in the UK or visited the UK. High Street represents the heart of many communities. So these big breach of integrity also affect how people perceive public services at large. And the result is that legal tools and IT were weaponized against the community and the end of the public service itself. So how the post office respond? Well, there are a series of funds to administer money to the victims, but in the end, well, how much a reputation cost, or how much could you compensate the family that lost a father due to heavy distress and consequently suicide? There are reports of up to 13 suicides as of now. So the public inquiry and the political scrutiny force large-scale redress schemes and law reform debates. So what are we going to do with this special private prosecutorial powers by the post office? Also, it's also quite telling about the state of integrity and anti-corruption right now, that this case only make it to the news and to the headlines after a series was released. So the power of media and the dissemination of information in order to advocate for this case to finally have some kind of resolution. Then there are some new governance structure, a revision into how some public procurement contracts are being allocated, but still Fujitsu is contracting with the UK government, and there are still reports of bugs with the Horizon system as we speak, which also tells a story of a country that people will normally associate with integrity, with transparency, with efficiency. It's still not being able to correct and modify what went wrong in the past. Third, there are threatened expectations about disclosure, evidence handling, and treatment of whistleblowers. Well, we still need to see how it's going to play out. There's been reports of the need of an update of the current whistleblowing protections in the UK, at least to follow similar guidelines to the one in the EU. But again, we have to wait and see. And finally, with early but important steps towards rebalancing this boundary and diagnostic system with interactive belief system. Well, we see here, it's a system that is highly unbalanced. And when all the pieces didn't work, but at the end, the interplay of this not working together caused this gross miscarriage of justice. And according to the former prime minister in the UK, it is still one of the grossest miscarriage of justice in the UK history. We have
Denisse, if you'd like, I'm aware of how busy the slide is, which I made for disclosure. So I'm very happy to go forward and try to clarify for our audience. Obviously, these cases got us very involved into all the details of each one of them, and it's perhaps hard to show that to a wider audience that may not know the cases. What I would like to do is talk about what we found overall, if that's okay with you. So remember how I said we took out public procurement out of the 6 sectors, high-risk sectors for corruption, and we looked at the 5 sectors. But within those 5 sectors, we looked at public procurement, whistleblowing, and money laundering. So indeed, each of this case is sort of heavy on at least 2 of those aspects. So Leonardo, well, not at least 2, well, 1. Leonardo is heavy of examples on public procurement irregularities. The post office has public procurement, as Denisse aptly explained, with Fujitsu also whistleblowing and ineffective protection of whistleblowers, according to the UK legislation, which will not change because the UK left the EU. Novartis has plenty of examples of public procurement irregularities through bribing officials for contracts, as well as whistleblowing. So we know that the whistleblowers in that case were prosecuted by using a loophole. in the legislation, even though Greece is a signatory of the whistleblower directive, EU whistleblower directive. Operation Zero has plenty of examples of whistleblowing irregularities and money laundering, and Nordea money laundering. Apart from those, because every research project has a lot of turns and twists, so until we decided to focus on those areas, we also looked at other things like bribe giving, administrative burden, trust, distrust in professions, in institutions, CEOs' gender and propensity to bribe, behavioral approaches to corruption are currently underway at Louis and Antwerp, so on and so forth. So we're looking at a lot of things at this organizational level of corruption and anti-corruption practice and policy. But for this deliverable, we focused on those three within each sector. So I'm going to go straight to this diagram to help us sort of make sense of the integrity management systems for anti-corruption across all cases. Remember the public to private value dominance. So what we noticed is that in the extreme sectors, so the public value dominant and the private value dominant, that is in defense and banking, the IMS, so integrity management systems existed. So it looks like these sectors of extreme public value dominance and extreme private value dominance are careful about adopting integrity management systems. So those existed. But there's always a but, right? In Leonardo's case, they weren't always fit for purpose, but every time this was revealed through each scandal, Leonardo kept changing them and reforming and adapting. So we got this longitudinal perspective with Leonardo. With Nordea, again, the IMSs existed, integrity management systems existed in form, but they were not really allowed to work, if that makes sense. The really murky gray area happened in the middle. So in infrastructure, healthcare, and sports. So sectors that I would call hybrid at best. So regardless of whether they were delivered or services were delivered by a public sector organization, as was the case in the post office case, a private sector organization working closely with public sector providers, as is the case with Novartis Hellas, or a web of organizations and agents, as is the case in Operation Zero, the integrity management systems were severely flawed. Typically, the interactive lever of control did not exist. So there was no way to really take on board any feedback loops within the organization or from outside the organization as well. In the case of Operation Zero, there was actually completely absent levers of control for integrity. I think this gap has now been addressed. I think there has been a recent regulation in sports. But in infrastructure and healthcare, there's still a very large gray area. What we noticed from our perspective as researchers was how little information there was in the healthcare case. We really had to struggle to find information. So that's something about transparency, perhaps in that area. For infrastructure, it would have been the same if it wasn't for the very public inquiry. Post office inquiry. So before the inquiry, there wasn't really much information at all. Post inquiry, there is now a website, so a wealth of information there. And that is an issue with corruption research, isn't there? So the access to information. So we're sort of almost out of time, so I'll walk through very quickly theoretical implications, although I should let Stelios discuss that. But I'm sure he'll appreciate if he knew what we think are the theoretical implications of our work. So we think we're onto something with these integrity management system structures in the balance or lack of balance within them. And we would like to go a little bit further in seeing how systematically so our conclusions are. Like, we looked at these 5 sectors, but does it mean that all infrastructure cases are similar to our post office? Okay, so it would be interesting to see if there are some systematic issues that have to do with public or private ownership or with where the sector is on that public-private sector value dominance continuum. So yes, and there's a lot more, but that's definitely the one I would go with. For policy implications, we came out of this report. We came up with 6 policy implications. So bear with me. I'll try to simplify them and go through them quicker than I would have otherwise preferred. So one implication or one recommendation for policy is to foster transnational meso-level diagnostic tools. So one that I think could be used as an example is the World Bank debarment list of organizations that were found to be corrupt or engaging in corruption, and therefore they are debarred from public procurement processes for a number of years until they redress. And Leonardo was on that list, by the way. So something like that at EU level might be useful, and World Bank offers a blueprint of it. Then within organizations, through, for example, intermediaries, commercial intermediaries, we could have organizations link incentives to integrity KPIs. So have integrity KPIs alongside the more traditional performance-driven KPIs might be a way forward. Then we also, by looking at these sectors, we also unraveled how anti-corruption policies at this meso level of organizations should be sector-specific. There are sector-specific challenges and opportunities for regulation. And perhaps intermediate organizations may be a way to operationalize that. Strengthen public procurement as a control surface. There are certain features of public procurement that could be enforced at state and EU level, such as, beneficial ownership transparency being non-negotiable, such as independent technical validation, and so on. Whistleblowing policy. Now there is a European directive on whistleblowing, and we're currently working on a bit of research to find out if that's made a difference. But additionally, that there are some additional things we could have, and perhaps with the new anti-corruption directive that could be pursued, such as, for example, learn and act logs for organizations to learn from near misses and whistleblowing practices. And finally, follow the money infrastructures, in particular industries such as finance or global sports, to address the money laundering risks. Right. You'll be delighted to learn that I'm done. And I'd like to pass on the microphone to Stelios Zyglidopoulos, editor of Journal of Business Ethics, for contributions to business ethics research, and later to Roberto Kukuczka, if Roberto is there. Oh, we'll find out in a minute. Okay, over to you, Stelios.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I'm section editor, not the editor of JB.
Yeah, I know, editor.
And
One of.
yeah, and second, it says Alexei on my web page. I have no idea why, but my name is Stelios Zyglidopoulos. I work at Carleton University. And the other Stelios Zyglidopoulos who appears to be in Glasgow is a fake one. Don't look at him. Uh, anyway, thank you very much for having me here. I think this is a very, very important project and a very important issue in today's world, especially. And I think that the contribution it makes overall from the parts of the project that I'm aware of, it's a huge thing. I don't know everything basically about the project, but from the parts of the project that I'm aware of, it makes a very good contribution to the business ethics from the bottom up, in a sense, not what people should do based on some philosophical, ethical theory, but mostly what people actually do and how we all at the organizational, at the state, at the individual level deal with issues like corruption and trying to increase the integrity of us. Now, the if I were to comment first on what Adina, the project, overall project that Adina did, from what I've seen of the presentation, I haven't read much about that, but basically this integrity management systems that Adina was talking about are becoming increasingly important in all kinds of organizations because a general trend that is taking place, and I've seen this trend taking place over the last 20, 30 years or something, is that governments are pushing a lot of their obligations to regulate to corporations. And it was very clear for me, at least in the UK banking system, that I was a little bit involved. Where the government said, well, this is the general guidelines and find a system that will fulfill these guidelines. And it was up to the banks to find this management integrity system that meets these requirements of regulation. So in a sense, it's some kind of outsourcing from the government, but it's happening continuously, and organizations have to deal with this complex phenomenon of corruption, which is very complicated and amorphous and doesn't have one kind of simple answer. And unfortunately, to paraphrase what Bernhard said, he said that ethics does not cost the earth. Unfortunately, lack of ethics might cost the earth. That is something that we are seeing. So this is a very interesting and very important disintegrity management systems. Coming back to the using AI and in studying corruption and studying integrity and anti-corruption issues, that I was sort of reviewing the outcome of this. This is a very important, I think, issue because it sort of adds to the toolbox of the organizations in being able to deal with corruption and increase their integrity systems and so on and facilitate certain things, certain functions. The project was very well organized around 6 themes, I think: people, data, software, something I can't read because my handwriting is terrible, integrity management systems, communications, people, and something else that I still can't read. Anyway, but it's a very organized and a number of systems that are all very important, and most importantly, they're not all equally researched. That is, I think, the most important thing here. And the project was able to identify certain gaps, like, for example, hardware and infrastructure. We could talk about hardware, infrastructure, energy, lack of energy, because all these AI systems and all these data centers that we have costed an enormous amount of energy. So that will create a problem. And it was able to identify certain gaps and certain holes that we need to focus on in the future. And another issue that I think that this project identified very clearly was the data requirement to have clean data or appropriate data and data or data. I'm not sure which is the correct pronunciation, but it's the using them to train the systems. In a sense, from what I understand, you can use corrupt data to train the system to make wrong answers. So it is very important over the longer term. And from what I understand here, there is no silver bullet for anti-corruption or for dealing with corruption or for increasing the integrity of organizations, systems, and individuals. It has to be an interaction of all of these things. There is no one thing. And that That is clear from the project that Adina was talking about earlier, where there were a lot of issues coming into play, and none of them was the whole answer. There was only a partial answer that had to be dealt with in conjunction with other things. And second, um, from the project about people, data, software, hardware, infrastructure, communication, and processes, I figured it out finally. That basically says that all of these things play a role, and one of them could lead to a gap in the overall performance. It's not a plug and play kind of system. You need to focus on all of this in the systems, in the processes. You might have 5 out of 6, and the one that's left over might create a huge problem for the application of an AI. Finally, I found very interesting the project on AI, because it was in a sense using AI techniques or systems to study AI, which I found very interesting. And also that it makes a first step in establishing some kind of research rigor in using AI tools in research methodologies or in research projects, which is very interesting and very significant in its own, independently of what we're using it for in the future, because sooner or later we will have to have AI-driven literature reviews or research projects and establish certain parameters that make them legit and appropriate for research and publications. So I think that's all I have to say. Thank you very much, and I think it's a very, very significant project, especially in today's world of
Thank you so much, Stelios.
increasing corruption, I'm afraid. Thank you.
I think Stelios also had notes about work package 6 and his discussion. But I'm summarizing what he said. That's of relevance to work package 4. The no silver bullet, indeed. The problem with a system as a solution, when you have a system as a solution, you know that it's not a particular one configuration that would fit every type of organization. And this is why perhaps going for organizational or organizations intermediaries may be a better way forward at this meso level of corruption, organizational, than country level regulation. Now, next we had Roberto, but Roberto broke his leg, so we'll forgive Roberto for not being here. It's a pretty good reason, and probably the only reason that we would forgive him for. Alina, do you want to say a few words before we take questions, or would you prefer take questions and then say a few words?
I'll actually encourage people to already flag out if they want to speak.
That's absolutely fine. So I'll go back to this and ask for any questions.
Please. I have a question for the team myself. Actually, what comes out of here, it's again coming out of the broader context. The fantastic demanding regulation that we would all want was actually passed by the European Union. Now it is the due diligence. And as you know very well, we are backtracking on this. A lot of companies oppose this due diligence directive. They flagged out that costs are simply not implementable, that a lot of companies which are doing well on integrity actually do not need this because they want to do well. They are above the regulation. It's not about compliance. It's about their own commitments. And probably, settling with choosing an environment of less risk. But now we have important state actors, like Germany, who are pushing for backtracking on this. So, I was thinking aside the solutions where I think it would be great if cross BridgeGap, for instance, we would do a paper on the solution of debarment. But again, we have to be realistic. We have to ask ourselves, is it possible that a company like Airbus, although sanctioned heavily, although confessing to malfeasance in a number of countries, would this company ever be disbarred in the European Union? We are now in times of commercial wars where we are afraid that Americans want to punish our companies out of geopolitical reasons, and we are out to punish their companies for the same reason. So a number of the solutions that we discuss are simply in a very difficult political environment.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely. And that also shows how the political environment is taking us halfway there. Yes, we know less about this meso level, organizational level, but without a permissive political environment, that meso level cannot really be pursued. And you're right that since we started BridgeGap, we started on an up and a moment of optimism when it comes to anti-corruption efforts and effectiveness. But unfortunately, the political tide has turned since. So, yes, we see nation states rolling back on integrity. We see organizations rolling back on integrity because they can. But it is really important to continue our own pursuits to understanding and pushing for normative action. And await better political tidings, I suppose.
Stelios, in a way, made an assertion which I'm not completely sure it's backed by evidence. I mean, I would love it to be. I am, part of this research group at World Bank who always argued that there is a cost for companies to behave without integrity. But on the other hand, I really do not think that so many companies would behave without integrity if it would be costly and not bring some profit. So my question really is in your future research, in our future research as a group, taking it for a fact that we enter an era in which integrity doesn't matter anymore. Apparently, in the anti-corruption defense strategy of President Trump, the word corruption does no longer appear, while last time, in the last one under the previous president, it featured 20 times. And this tells us something. So let's say we cannot rely on these levels. Can we actually think of a way closer to self-regulation, closer to some sort of civic society? You know, we have these integrity pacts, which are overvalued, but can we think of a way in which companies which behave well, which have integrity, not due to compliance, but because they are honest companies and they can actually make a profit without bribing? Can we think of a way of promoting these companies so to create a good behavior dividend? I mean, in other words, a more civical way, looking more into self-regulation, abandoning the hope that regulation will help us, because look what happens. We pass ideal regulation and then it is scaled back. It's just a suggestion for a future policy paper based on your work around the group.
Yeah, that's really excellent. Not to monopolize, would somebody else from the group like to speak? Bernhard, yeah, go on.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly jump in on this one. Yeah, I mean, that goes back to this question of, voluntary incentive schemes versus hard regulation, right? But what we see increasingly, of course, is sort of the segmentation of regulatory spaces, right? So if you think about the EU, right, with the CBAM mechanism, for instance, which seeks to redress differences in regulation on climate, right? I mean, we might probably imagine something similar along governance lines, right? So where imports from jurisdictions that do not have regulations for whistleblowing or other good governance mechanisms, will face higher entry costs into the EU common market, right? I think that is sort of something where you can leverage, the power of your domestic market, and I think that will have much greater compliance pull than all the voluntary schemes and sort of reputational mechanisms that we've tried and tested, and don't think that really have done that much of a difference, to be honest.
Thank you so much, Bernhard. Luca?
Yes, some time ago, a shift had been recognized from shareholder accountability towards stakeholder accountability. In your research, is this completely gone now? There is also a lot of discussions about ESG values and the societal and stakeholder value ESG can deliver. Has this completely disappeared?
I see Alvise's hand. I'll venture a quick answer and see if what Alvise has to say may also be an answer. So in the case of the post office, Luca, so the irregularities happened about 20 years ago. And for 20 years, the post office and Fujitsu continued in their partnership, fruitful partnership, unburdened. And the way it all came out was through a documentary, basically. So yes, I think there is such a thing as stakeholder accountability, but perhaps the role of the media, discouragingly so perhaps, is important there. Now, of course, we also know that the media is experiencing some challenges in the current political climate. But yet, I think definitely there is some space for stakeholder accountability. We only saw that clearly in the post office case and somewhat in the Novartis Hellas case. Alvise?
Yeah, just a quick addition to what Bernhard was already saying in relation to Alina's question. I think part of what our evidence shows is that a lot of this integrity management, if is there, stays well within company boundaries, and that might be in itself a limitation, meaning you would want to place some of these calls for integrity almost outside the boundaries of the company and where the company actually kind of engages in transactions. So in a sense, and that from an organizational perspective poses kind of issues because you're a bit outside the company hierarchical structure, but also you're not exactly within a proper market structure. If you think, for instance, a supply chain, a stable supply chain relation. So in a sense, I think that is where probably there is a scope for looking into how the role of civil society might kind of might be relevant in a sense.
Yes, and I think that could apply, just going back to the system, the integrity management system and the levers. I can imagine using organizational intermediaries as part of an organization's own interactive integrity management system. So having those interactive systems, not necessarily only within the organization, but also with other organizations in established networks and sector level, networks, for lack of a better word. Belief systems, again, could come from the organization itself, but could also come from outside it, and could also come from regulators. Any other questions? No? Okay. Anything around the new anti-corruption directive?
Well, has somebody read it in detail? That's the question.
Oh, exactly. I have not. I was traveling, so I'm hoping that somebody else would be able to reflect on what we presented today through that.
Reading by hints, it is clear that it is without an agreement on abuse of office, for instance. Okay, reading by hints. So it actually seems to be quite a low denominator, but we have to wait and see. But there are specialized people who are looking at this. Nedim Hodrich, our colleague, Alberto Alemano, there are people who really follow this. So the moment when we'll have something, we will put it up. Maybe we should just end by saying what is next in BridgeGap, if there is.
Yes, absolutely. I'll get to that slide in a minute because it's quite exciting and very soon. Okay, I'll leave it to you, Alina, to explain.
Thank you so much. Nice pictures. But could I actually substitute them by sharing screen, or I don't have sharing screen rights?
Can you try?
Try. But it's not a problem if I don't, because what I would like you to send to is to two websites. First, it is ours, the BridgeGap website, corruptiondata.eu, whereas you will discover as of today, although we did not flag it in full, our webmaster Denisse Rodriguez-Olivari is with us. We didn't flag it in full because it's experimental and we have just put it. We already have put there, in fact, the data for the new European Transparency Index. The new European Transparency Index has three components this year. It's called to be European Transparency Map, but in fact, we have not decided to aggregate it. So first, it has like a general T index. Maybe you see something of my share screen now? You do, don't you?
I don't, but if others do, I see that people nod,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
great. Okay?
Yes.
This is the biggest. I'm showing this to you, and you won't see this on the website. So again, the website is corruptiondata.eu. I invite everyone in BridgeGap members in particular to check there to see what is new, to send feedback. Or okay, the data was just finished being collected and validated 5 days ago. So this is experimental, put it up. What you see here is for the first time collected the political finance transparency in Europe. And what is new is that we have the two distinctions that we promote throughout BridgeGap. One is the de jure index, which includes the legal, the regulation obligations of disclosing data on parties and candidates during elections, I mean, related to electoral campaigns and in between elections. And the other is actually de facto, what you can actually find in every country if you look on the websites of these parties and candidates in order to figure out, again, what is a novelty, both their donations, their income of these parties, and their expenditures, because different types of corruptions come in relation to these two sides. And this is what makes us different from previous attempts, such as International IDEA, which has a long tradition of documenting political finance regulation, but not looking at de facto, looking only at de jure. And this is also what makes us different compared to the Global Data Barometer, which does not distinguish between income and expenditures. They don't look at expenditures at all because they are a global aggregator. They are not corruption scholars. Now, with this instrument that we created, we can, for the first time, ask a number of very meaningful research questions. We're going to do this only next year. But now, again, another important thing to flag about BridgeGap is our complete 100% open science policy. We have just finished this. It's a massive collection effort, and this is already published. The database is actually on Zenodo as of yesterday. It is only the materials which are undergoing review, but the database is there. It's been through an online panel review, and we constantly get feedback. It has all the links, so you can get directly to see if the donations are there or are not there, what is there and what is missing, and why we coded this way or not way. So in other words, what BridgeGap does is that we're pioneering a new generation of indicators which are transparent. Indicators about transparency have to be transparent themselves, and which allow us for the first time to measure implementation gap, enforcement gap, and actually, regulation adequacy gap, because regulation does not solve everything. It can actually be bad regulation. It can actually be red tape. I just use this example as of today, but also today being International Anti-Corruption Day, we have updated the index for public integrity for 120 countries. So go on and check your own. You will find this on corruptionrisk.org. Our other webpage, I wrote this in the chat, and I'm not putting any more slides because I think we have a next call. But this is just one day in our life, International Anti-Corruption Day. And what we have done today, we have listened to this wonderful presentation of our WP4 colleagues on their work at organization level. We have updated this public integrity for 120 countries, which is based on very specific indicators. You can see there not only where countries are, but why, what is missing to them to do better on integrity, what should they change to progress. And then for the first time, we have moved in Europe to map transparency again, making this difference between de jure and de facto, where we expect, I mean, we hope to be first, but again, since we publish the data, if we do not hurry and lose our time with other issues, other people will use our data and publish really great papers, because it's for the first time that this data is put together and can answer really significant questions on political corruption, which, as you know, continues to be a problem in Europe, despite some European countries being on top of public integrity index. You will discover that some others are actually not doing so well. Thank you. And maybe we should...
Thank you so much, Alina. Thank you, everyone. And
for the next two editions, if Luca has this, the next two podcasts of Anti-Corruption in Progress are in January and February. I'm not completely sure that we have a poster. We generally have. If we don't, just follow us. We are going to announce on LinkedIn on time. One is Universities of Utrecht milestone, measuring corruption across border, and the other one is the European Political Finance Index that I have just shown. Thanks, everyone, the team for the great work, the organizers putting this together, and for all externals who spend their International Anti-Corruption Day time with us.
Thank you, and happy International Anti-Corruption Day. It's funny saying that. Do interact with the links that we put in the chat to the full report, to the two websites, a website Alina mentioned, and so on. Good to see you, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.